Latvia is a land defined by its rich history, but if you know anything about this country, you also know that not all of its past is pleasant. Along the main streets in the capital stands a dark reminder of those troubling times. Known as the Corner House, this building was once the center of political repression during the period when Latvia was crushed under the boot of the Soviet Union. Many who were taken there were never seen again. What shocking crimes took place beneath this Latvian street? What horrors awaited the people taken inside? And how is Latvian society today still grappling with the trauma that echoes to this very day? This is a communist-flavored slice of horror, and the truth about it remains rather difficult to swallow. To understand what happened in the Corner House, we also need to share a bit of history, both of Latvia itself and of the building that would come to symbolize the oppression endured for half a century. The Corner House, as it became known, was designed by Aleksandrs Vanags in 1910 and completed in 1912. It showcased Riga's famous Art Nouveau style blended with classic elements. Originally, it served as a residential apartment building that housed stores, a library, a pharmacy, and a music society, embodying the peak of modern, forward-thinking cosmopolitan European society at the time. But that wouldn't last, would it? In 1918, the Latvian War of Independence broke out just as Europe was beginning to recover from its years of self-destruction. Soviet Russia invaded, capturing Riga, while various forces within the country vied for control. By 1920, peace talks began after Polish and Latvian forces managed to push the Red Army back. Shortly thereafter, Latvia established itself as a parliamentary republic for the first time. But Aleksandrs Vanags did not survive the Soviet occupation. He was shot by Latvian Bolsheviks in 1919 for his counter-revolutionary activities. In a cruel irony, his death would not be the last linked to the Corner House at the hands of the communists. During the conflict, the War Committee used the building as its headquarters. However, from 1920 onward, various government departments occupied the building, including the Latvian Ministry for the Interior. In 1934, Latvia fell into dictatorship through a bloodless coup. Then, by 1940, in the midst of World War II, the Soviets returned, unleashing a brutal and oppressive terror that claimed countless Latvian lives. It was the very Corner House where the Soviet secret police, known at the time as the NKVD, set up their operations. But this too didn't last long. In the summer of 1941, the Nazis invaded and Latvia fell under their occupation. Some government agencies of the Nazi-appointed puppet regime, along with a student organization calling itself the National Watch, used the building. As the Soviets fled, they lacked the time to destroy the evidence of the unspeakable brutality that had taken place there. The Nazis collected documentary evidence of the events during the period when the Soviets occupied it, and in May 1944, they even briefly opened an exhibition to display their findings. When the goddamn Nazis expose you as the bad guys, you know that you're really fucked up. But the Soviets returned in 1944 for the third time in a generation. They resumed operations where they'd left off at the Corner House, and the NKVD, which later became the KGB, simply carried on its established routine, running a violent and clandestine campaign of political repression. Undesirable elements, as they were labeled, could be detained for crimes as trivial as engaging in anti-Soviet conversations or instigating panic. Paranoia was rampant, the violence even more so, and the Corner House lay at the very center of it all. What actually occurred within those walls? What did that half-century-long Soviet campaign of terror, which lasted until the fall of the USSR, truly look like? And what was life like for those confined within its boundaries? And be warned right now, as you're probably expecting, it ain't pretty. The Corner House's actual address is 61 Brivabas Ilya. This building was where the so-called Cheka, the informal name for the secret police, was established during the Soviet stints in Riga. But it was far more than just an administrative headquarters for a dangerous organization. It was the epicenter of a reign of terror that petrified and traumatized the citizens of Latvia's capital. During the Soviet occupation of Latvia, 48,000 criminal cases were initiated for perceived anti-Soviet offenses, many of which inevitably included the Corner House as a stop-off destination for political dissidents. The sad reality is that some people never left. We describe the Corner House here so that you can understand the depravity that took place within its walls and truly grasp how people interacted with this building on a day-to-day basis. All but one entrance to the building were reserved exclusively for KGB members. Only the entrance on the corner of Brivasiya and Stabuia were available to ordinary members of the public, although they still needed a permit to enter. On the outside of this corner house, the windows at street level were barred. This detail might be related to the incarceration of individuals there, or it could be a nod to the building's historical use for government and security purposes. In either case, the intention was to prevent unauthorized entry and to stop those inside from leaving. Additionally, on the external facade of the building, there was a postbox where people could leave inquiries about relatives who might have been arrested. Remember, this was a building in Soviet Latvia managed by the KGB. When people were arrested, they were simply picked up off the street in broad daylight and vanished without a trace. So when someone went missing, relatives could inquire at the corner house about their loved one's whereabouts, only to likely receive a reply along the lines of, "Oh, your brother, the one seen on West Street, who mysteriously disappeared after getting into an unmarked van that was spotted entering through our gate. Never seen him, never, don't know anything about him." Because, of course, the KGB would never lie. That would be absurd. But this mailbox also acted somewhat like a confession booth. Beyond just inquiries about missing family and friends, people were encouraged to denounce those around them if they suspected any anti-revolutionary activities. And if the secret police took an interest, those individuals would be apprehended too, providing an excuse for settling personal grudges by getting rid of someone they disliked. Alright, so that was the exterior of the building. What about the interior? Now, at first glance, it appeared to be a fairly standard structure with several upper floors and a basement. But, as you know, nothing here was ever truly standard. Inside, a lift and a staircase provided access between the administration offices, interrogation rooms, and the dark, dank basement where the prisoners were kept. Upstairs, political prisoners were often brutally beaten and tortured to force false confessions before being sent downstairs. The lift, the usual means of transporting prisoners between these floors, has even been described as a vertical coffin with a hidden compartment where NKVD officers could stand watch. We must rely on eyewitness accounts for this detail, as no images have been found. Meanwhile, the staircase was allegedly secured by a wire mesh barrier to ensure that no prisoner could leap to their death. And what of the cells themselves, where people were housed for months, if not years? Well, they were located deep underground. Remember, this was a Soviet-era political prison. People weren't meant to be here, and the conditions inside, well, they reflected that. In the basement, there were several cells of varying sizes. Some were larger, intended for multiple inmates. Others were solitary single cells, and there were even windowless dark isolation cells. The basement had a capacity of around 200 prisoners. While that might seem like a significant number for one building, the fact that communal cells were often far beyond overcrowded speaks volumes about the Soviet police state in charge. In some communal cells, dozens of prisoners were crammed together with the temperature maintained at around 30 degrees Celsius. With only a few small windows, if any at all, the oppressive heat, sweat, and smell could drive anyone to madness. Most of the time, the only bathroom available in each cell was a bucket tucked away in the corner. And even if windows were present, they'd be covered so the prisoners could not see outside. Lights remained on around the clock to keep prisoners both unstimulated and awake, while guards deliberately made unnecessary noises at night, adding to the torment of the hot, smelly, sleepless nights. This wasn't exactly the Ritz either. The beds consisted of metal frames without mattresses. Not that you'd get much sleep on them anyway, or even be able to lie down comfortably with over 30 other people crammed into a typical 6-man cell. Prisoners were also under constant surveillance through peepholes in the doors and walls. If they talked to one another, punishment would follow. We may not know the details of those punishments, but the red carpets lining the hallways, well, they certainly had a purpose. Additionally, there were strict precautions in case prisoners lost control. A horizontal bar was fixed to the wall along the corridor. If a guard ever felt threatened, they could lean against it, triggering an alarm throughout the entire building and making any escape virtually impossible. One man who spent 6 months in the corner house during the early 1960s was Nuts Skyanix, and he vividly recalls his experience, quoting here, "It was deadly silent. And if you were brought out into the corridor and another prisoner appears, you had to turn to the wall with your face to the floor so that you wouldn't know who else was present." End quote. After his time in the corner house, he was sent to a labor camp in the Ural Mountains where he spent more than 6 years. What was his crime? Well, he wrote poetry. The basement also housed a kitchen, staffed by prisoners from another Soviet jail. Rotten ingredients were delivered through a window well, and these prisoners cooked them without washing, transforming the fare into bread and thin soup. A ghastly display of contempt for those imprisoned there. Now, some prisoners were lucky enough to be granted occasional outdoor exercise in an open-air tiger cage situated within the smaller of the two internal courtyards. A large wooden barrier mounted on the wall above this courtyard blocked the view from the taller neighboring buildings. Metal stairs led up to guard positions atop the tiger cages, further intensifying the relentlessly oppressive atmosphere. On the walls, the scratchings carved by inmates remained etched in the concrete, what may have been one of the only ways those incarcerated here could express themselves. You'd arguably prefer this courtyard to the larger internal one, which housed the gate through which prisoners were brought into the complex via vans. According to the BBC, hooks can still be seen affixed to the walls here today, marks of where inmates were suspended by chains several meters off the ground. A truly barbaric punishment. And nowhere is this contempt for life more evident than in the execution room, the part of the building where countless political prisoners were shot while imprisoned. The execution chamber in the corner house was used exclusively during the initial Soviet occupation of 1940. During later occupations, executions were carried out first in Riga Central Prison and later in Moscow. Eventually, the room was converted into a shop where KGB agents could buy their cigarettes, with the walls covered to hide the traces of bullet holes. After the occupation ended, however, the brutality was revealed. The coverings were peeled back, exposing hundreds of bullet holes meticulously marked in different colors for all to see. In one corner, you can see where a blood train was carved into the concrete to make the room easier to clean. Today, mugshots of 30 victims who lost their lives here between January and June 1941 adorn the walls, though many more are believed to have perished during that short period. It remains one of the darkest places, devoid of all humanity, in one of the most oppressive buildings in the Baltics. The corner house stood for decades as a symbol of Soviet oppression. Latvia had been crushed under the boot of an oppressive regime for half a century. Yet when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, Latvia emerged, bleary-eyed, into a new world of sovereignty and independence, much like many other post-Soviet states. The KGB was declared a criminal organization within the country and was subsequently abolished. Still, the story of the corner house, it doesn't end here. The Latvian state police continued to occupy it until 2007. It's difficult to understand why so many different state apparatuses made use of the building over the years. Perhaps it was because the property was publicly owned and located in the central spot, or maybe it simply provided the amenities that government departments required without needing much modification, like an execution room. Eventually, however, its official use came to an end, and the corner house stood abandoned for years. And so, what is the story of the corner house today? Was it doomed to be a rotting relic of an oppressive Soviet past? Well, not at all. Today it serves as a place to educate locals and tourists about what happened here from the 1940s to the 1990s. Once abandoned, the building was converted into a museum, but with a twist. Unlike many museums housed in sites marked by grim history, which often modify their structures for safety or preservation, this museum faces an ongoing internal battle. How much should one alter history? The corner house has taken a minimalist approach, leaving many areas of the building as they were, complete with peeling paint and rust. In some parts, there are memorials and exhibits accompanied by boards that recount the horrors that occurred here. In others, the touristy veneer is completely stripped away. For a brief moment, you can imagine standing exactly where so many political prisoners once stood all those years ago. It is a powerful way of saying what happened here was real, and it should feel real to you too. Since 2014, visitors have been able to view the cells, dungeons, lift interrogation rooms, office workspaces, courtyards, and even the former execution chamber. The building stands as a memorial not only to those who suffered within its walls, but also to all of Latvia's people who resisted Soviet oppression. A screen displays eyewitness testimonies from those who were incarcerated and, by some luck, managed to leave the Soviet prison system alive. There is also a model of Riga Central Prison where people were sent for execution, along with photographs of executed prisoners whose remains were later exhumed. Upstairs, an administrative office has been maintained and furnished with period pieces, including a large filing cabinet left partly open so that tourists can view the confiscated personal items of individuals who never recovered them. A desk in the office displays some of the items the Soviets once used for communication. In particular, there's an old phone with no dial, just a single button that once connected directly to high-ranking officials in Riga or even Moscow itself. Another exhibit titled Latvian suitcase is incredibly powerful, offering a poignant glimpse into the fate of one example among the 60,000 Latvians deported to Siberia under Stalin in the 1940s. And it makes you ponder, what would you choose to take with you if the NKVD allotted you only 2 minutes to pack your belongings? Some people were forced to make these impossible decisions. Yet the upstairs portion of the museum might soon be gone. While the Museum of Occupation retains the ground floor and basement, the rest of the building was put up for auction in 2020, likely in an effort to restore its original use as residential apartments. However, securing a buyer proved challenging. We wonder why. I mean, it takes a very specific kind of person to live in a building where so many terrible things occurred. Mr. Nutskajanics is determined not to let the building fall into obscurity or be completely overshadowed by the Museum of Occupation. After all, the building serves as a real-life reminder of past events, not just on boards and screens, but in the actual spaces where they happened. In his own words, it's true the building's reputation isn't very good, but I believe the city needs it, so it remembers. You can't escape history. I can't remember where everything was, but I want to see the cell where I was held. Even now, the building remains controversial. While we were putting this video together, the building was vandalized in an attack that shattered 2 windows, prompting the installation of more advanced security systems. It isn't the first time in recent years that symbols of the occupation have been defaced, some acts carried out by pro-Russian elements since the war in Ukraine began. This situation also reflects the enduring schism between Russians and Latvians, a divide rooted in their shared, yet profoundly unequal Soviet history. Files from Soviet-controlled Latvia acknowledge that the country was replete with spies throughout the occupation. However, these documents do not reveal who was doing the spying or who was responsible for sending people to the corner house and beyond in their clandestine operations against the Latvian populace. The names of the KGB agents were encoded, while their real identities were recorded on 4,300 cards stored in sacks and guarded by Latvia's authorities on the outskirts of town. Although the archives are now open, those cards remained hidden for a long time. Every time the Latvian parliament was on the verge of opening those files, the move was blocked by unnamed senior politicians determined to conceal their own past collaboration with the KGB. Finally, in 2018, under a new parliament, the files were revealed, implicating many Latvian citizens in aiding the Soviets. However, not all names were exposed. Only the 4,300 listed in the so-called checker bags emerged, even though it's believed that the KGB had 24,000 agents in the nation at that time. So there's a question of why some people were implicated in this way, but not others. The files range from those who actively helped repress others to those who didn't even know they were agents. Some claim that these files were left deliberately to spark internecine conflict among Latvians when they were revealed, a situation that indeed destroyed the lives and friendships of many families and friends. Others argue that the specific 4,300 cards were too inconsequential for the Soviets to bother destroying or taking with them when everything collapsed, which further prompts the question of what might never have been revealed. In the years since, this process has been described as a partial freedom, and while it provided catharsis for the nation, it probably doesn't tell the whole story. Today, in the corner house, a large Latvian flag flies inside the main courtyard. This detail serves as a reminder of what this building once represented: a place of brutal repression under Moscow's rule. Now liberated, the Latvian people are free, and they must never take that freedom for granted, for if they do, repression might one day return. Thank you for watching.